Just waiting for the YouTube stream to be ready to go here.
Hi, Frank. Hi, Dave. Hi, everyone.
Hi. Oh, good to go. All right. Okay. So good evening, everyone. Yeah, we've had kind of a interesting several weeks here. I wanted to first give people a chance to I don't know if anyone have any questions or um, responses to the Chud retreat with Drup and Palki. I was so happy that that happened, even though karma intervened and I wasn't able to participate except at the very end. Um, so anyone, any thoughts on that? Otherwise, I wanted to read something from Jigten Sumgun, but let's go ahead. So all of you met then Virginia Bloom, who was Drupal.
We just wanted to say it was a great retreat, and the translator was fantastic, and the lamb was great, and it was just a beautiful experience for us.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very
Yeah.
good insight.
Yeah. Yeah. I've often thought myself that Chud has so many um, well, I mean, all the practices do benefits, but there's just something about Chud that it has one foot in the sutric world of ordinary appearances and then this other foot in the tantric world. Because when, you're visualizing yourself as yourself and then go through this whole um, progression, um, there's just something about it. I've sometimes had the sense that it would really maybe be the most approachable practice for America when it comes to the Tantra. It's just so easy to believe that, you are yourself when you meditate, as opposed to believing that you're Tara or Vajrayogini or whomever. You know,
Right.
the habit is just so strong. Um, and of course, the thing that's so important and yet is really the biggest obstacle is for folks to have enough confidence that you just keep going, that you just keep doing these practices with whatever modicum of faith is there. Because without faith, there's nothing. It's like Guru Rinpoche said, a mind without faith is like, um, now I can't remember the images that he used. But for one, it's like we talked about doubt as being like a two-headed needle. You can't stick the needle through the ball of yarn like you need to, so it becomes useful. Single pointed. The doubt, it just gets stuck. And then also, oh yeah, he said that a mind without faith is like a burnt seed. It just loses. It can't sprout. But even the smallest sprout has the potential. Even the unburnt seed, has the potential to become a sequoia. Um, because what's remarkable, and I think that is really very, very wonderful about Tibetan Buddhism, is that first of all, it's not really Tibetan. I mean, I know it has Tibetan qualities in that, and you can properly understood, you can say Tibetan Buddhism, but it's the vastness of the teachings as they were developed in India and as they existed in China too. Although the Chinese ended up somehow not supporting their own, you might say indigenous, that means came directly from India to China, their own indigenous in that sense. Um, Tantric practices died out. People don't know. Maybe the imagery was just too the Chinese, I'm told, are kind of not me saying this. It's John Blofeld. It's a man who lived in China for years and loved Chinese culture and fluent and everything. And he thought the Chinese had more of a puritanical kind of tone to their civilization, and the tantric images just kind of didn't work for them. So what happened was that when the Mongols conquered China, then the Tantra came in that way, the Tibetans having converted the Mongols. But my point is that in China, you also had this full range. So often in America, we just get little slivers of the Dharma in terms of the teaching. And in a way, nothing bad with that. I mean, the Dharma itself is pure. And if you have a connection with a certain slice of it, so to speak, that's fine. But there's something about the vastness of the teachings and the vastness of the expression that is very helpful, because, our minds, and each one of us is such a unique piece of work, that you're attracted to different things at different times, but the whole Dharma has the same essence. And so it makes it very skillful, because if you just keep going, there's something that's evolving in us, even though we don't necessarily sense it. And yet, it's the experience of people for 2,500 years. And the teachings are so helpful, because when there is one kind of development or another, you have an intellectual framework that kind of makes sense. So you're not just wandering around, so to speak. It enhances the path aspect of the path. I mean, truth be truth. In the end, there's no path. Yes, all right, that's fine from a very high standpoint. But for people who are lost, we need a path, we need a guide, we need boundaries, we need all sorts of things. And happily, that's all presented to us. And yet, with this understanding that one hounds, one doubts. This is not blind faith. This is rather the full engagement of the mind with the mind. And so, of course, there's the level of the conceptual mind. But the conceptual mind is an excellent servant, but it's not a good master. And so when we throw away what appears to our limited view as transcendent, we're cutting ourselves off from, like, the living water, basically, the essence, the real power, what's really there. And so it's helpful, because you can have moments when it's like, you don't know, there's something that's particularly clear, that or vivid or alive. This ordinary world of appearances suddenly takes on kind of a glow, you might say, or an intensity, but not an emotional intensity, just an intensity of wisdom, of clarity. And part and parcel of that is this completely unfabricated compassion, this objectless compassion, which can't be faked. But on the other hand, we have the teachings, we can fake it, that's okay. With our training our mind, in this seemingly arbitrary way, the mind is trained. So it can seem, like you just sort of get a glimmer of the Pure Land, which is this kind of vividness and this aliveness, non-conceptuality. So there's so much. But I've often thought that Chod, maybe just because of my own reaction to it, we've had little chance to practice it, but happily had introductions to it through Gar Rinpoche, and before that, Lama Tarchen, and Kuzan Dechen Lingpa, the Tibetan Lama, who's also passed away, who just came across our path kind of unbidden. But remarkable, enough kind of events and unmanipulated experiences. I think we've all been so fortunate, because these lamas have actually come to us without actively kind of seeking. So it's like the statement, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. I think that's, literally true. But nonetheless, my very extremely limited experience with Chud still had great faith in it, and whatever reason, have not been able to practice it as a daily practice. But sometimes it occurs to me, maybe this is really a really tremendous opportunity for all of us Westerners. For one thing, it's just the use of that drum and the bell. There's just immediate mindfulness. You can't even get lost in your games of thinking about mindfulness. You're just so completely involved having to do that drum and that bell simultaneously. So it's extremely skillful. It allows us to not sabotage ourselves in the habitual ways that we do. So I was just so happy. Drupal seems to be a wonderful practitioner. She has a very, very calm and stable quality.
Yeah.
Uh,
She's a
and
beautiful person. She's
yeah, truly, truly. And there's such a teaching in that too, because again, there was a scene from what's the Brad Pitt movie about the Dalai Lama, 7 years in Tibet.
yeah,
There's a scene in there, several scenes that I really love, but one is where he's, stuck in Lhasa for 7 years because of World War II. He's trying to get back to Germany and Austria, and he can't do it because uh, the Chinese are resisting the Japanese invasion. If he could get to the Japanese diplomatically, he could get back home, but he can't. So he's stuck. And of course, the English in India. So he's stuck in Tibet. And Dalai Lama recognizes, look, this guy's an engineer, so he puts him to work doing various things and taking advantage. And meanwhile, he's getting introduced to Tibetan culture. And at one point in the movie, I don't know if this is true, but good point. He starts, getting kind of sweet on a Tibetan woman, and it's sort of a rivalry, I guess. He's a little bit jealous. She has a Tibetan boyfriend or somebody else who's in her sphere, could be a competitor like that, and so Heinrich Harr, Brad Pitt, is doing all these kind of, you know, like boys do in grade school, sort of semi outrageous things to stand out and get her attention and things like that. And at one point, she tells him, our cultures are different. In your culture, you like to stand out. In ours, we like to blend in, harmoniously. I just wonder, us in the West, we are really amazing. We're going in such strong directions, often in the wrong way, with so much energy and so much talent and so much really, good intention, but kind of lacking in method. And that's what strikes me about the Chud. It's just this wonderful, wonderful method. But also, been thinking these last couple of weeks about the vastness of the teachings themselves is just so wonderful because I mean I've had this sense when taking teachings from Gar Rinpoche, I mean he's not even a scholar, and yet uh, uh, hi, you certainly can have a seat. um what's always struck me, and you can get this from the Vajrakalaya book, um the tremendous articulation, the tremendous detail in the teachings. I mean, obviously, from him, it's coming out of deep realization, but nonetheless, it's inherently humbling because you can have arrogance, we all do, um, self attachment, of course, self grasping. And yet, when you, in a Dharma environment, when you run up against that depth and that kind of just knowledge, it's inherently humbling. And of course, that's extremely, extremely beneficial. There's a story of a Chinese master, maybe Japanese, I'm not sure. But anyway, a Buddhist master. And he had a student who was, if I'm not mistaken, like a government official, and I guess very high even. And the man had a lot of pride and arrogance, and he came to see the master, and they did this, natural kind of greeting ritual kind of thing, especially in a formal way when you're going to sit down with a Buddhist master. And so they're sitting face to face on the floor, cushions, and there's a small table between them, and an attendant monk comes in and puts down two teacups and pours out of the teapot the master's cup. And then the master says, I will pour for our guest, his student. And he starts pouring the tea for the visiting official. And of course, it goes up to the rim, and he just keeps on pouring. And it's flowing over and over and over. And of course, it's this situation, is so formal and so marked with, reticence, and you don't interrupt and all this thing. So he's so bound culturally in these ways. But finally, he just can't stand it anymore. He says, stop, stop. It's overflowing. There's no more room in the cup. And the master says to him, so too your mind. You have to empty your mind first before the teachings can enter, before realization can flower. And of course, that's our situation when you listen to the great advantage we have of, one, listening to a great teacher, but then secondly, just all the outer manifestations of the teachings. You realize there's a natural humility there, which is really, really helpful. And it's not a pounding down, that somehow you got to be lower than everyone else and therefore you'll be okay. It's not some sort of inverse kind of egoism, but rather it's showing you the nature of your own mind, your own inherent wisdom. And so you find yourself completely humbled, and yet having this natural updwelling of clarity and awareness. And again, the test of it is that compassion is the scent of it. Like they say, it's the scent of the lotus. So the lotus represents the wisdom. This plant that grows up from the mud has to be anchored in the mud of samsara, the mud of our experience, the mud of getting insulted, the mud of not getting your own way, of getting betrayed, of having the greatest victory turn into defeat and upside down, everything, disappointments. That mud of samsara, that impermanent samsara, it all ends in death. This is just mud. But growing out of that, but then above the muddy water, the lotus opens up. And it opens up naturally. We don't rip open the bud. It naturally opens up. And so with that comes a certain kind of patience, because when you have the confidence in this, the bud will open up. You're no longer in a hurry to do it. It's said that the strong wish to be born in Buddha Amitabha's Pure Land, at death, even someone who has suffered tremendous negativities, will be born in Amitabha's Pure Land. And the Amitayus Sutra has a listing of the sort of different levels of realization in the Pure Land. And the Pure Land is, it's when it's described, there are two ways of getting to enlightenment without meditation. Meditation is the great path. In the Vajrakalaya practice, we have this verse about, grant me the blessings to cross over the difficult path of meditation, because it's work. But there are two methods, actually, because we are Buddhas already. We don't know it, but we have Buddha nature. There are two methods by which one can come to realization without meditation. One is the practice of POA that we do here from time to time, this transference of one's consciousness to Buddha Amitabha's Pure Land at the moment of death. So it's a special tantric method using the tantric visualizations and the internal Sambhogakaya, the subtle, the bliss body that we each have, but we don't know. So we use that. The other, though, is sutric, meaning our ordinary kind of awareness. It's the great prayer to be reborn in Dewa Chen, composed by Raza Asya years ago. We had one Lama here who was actually a rebirth of that man. He lives in Beijing. But nonetheless, the sutra describes different levels of realization. You can find yourself in Buddha Amitabha's Pure Land, but inside a lotus bud. You're inside a lotus bud. You can hear Amitabha teaching. It's completely blissful. It's completely comfortable. There's no hunger. There's no thirst. There's no fear. There's no nothing. There's no need. But you can hear the teachings. And it's said that even though you've had tremendous negative karma, that is purified by just having to be inside that bud, but it's not a suffering. And you have the confidence that bud is going to open and eventually another level of some attain to it immediately. You can hear Buddha Amitabha, but you're not in the bud anymore. Then you can see Amitabha. You can different levels of realization. So this vast display of circumstance and levels of mind and the mythology that is an expression of all of this is very rare, really, in the West. We have a very kind of, I don't know, I mean, we live in a materialistic age, and our main spiritual traditions are, eternalistic. And what I mean by that is that you have a creator, and then we are creatures. There's a creation, creatures, we are creatures in that creation. There's a creator, but you can't jump. There's a separation there. You can't, if you want to be the creator, that's a heresy. So we have these systems that kind of have that idea that you get the right idea, and there's a transcendent idea. So there's a basis for morality more than just our own likes. And there you go. But for the Dharma, there's this huge, huge display of mythology and the stories can be extremely helpful. But in America, we don't hear that so much. It's not part of our education, and we don't necessarily have an inclination towards it, and we don't understand that it too is the manifestation of our true nature. So I wanted to read something from Jigten Sumgön. As I think we all know, Jigten Sumgön's, although he didn't set out to found anything, he's like the we have this lineage starting with Buddha Vajradhara, the holder of the Vajra, transmitted direct experience of Tilopa, this Indian guru, who transmitted it to Naropa. Naropa transmitted the teachings to this lineage of blessings to Marpa, who was a Tibetan who went down to India to get these teachings. Marpa then fully transmitted it to Milarepa, Milarepa to his student Gampopa, Gampopa to his student Pagmodrupa, and then Pagmodrupa to Jigten Sumgön. The Drikung tradition comes out of all of that. And again, as a distinct school with Jigten Sumgön. So this remarkable figure, I always get the dates wrong, but I think it's in the late 1100s that he lived. So Virginia Bloom, our translator for the Chod retreat, gave me this wonderful little book, very brief instructions from Jigten Sumgön. It's been translated by a team put together by Hun Lee, who's a Drikung teacher, Chinese or Taiwanese, down in, I think he's in Virginia. He's been up here several times too. Nice, very nice man. But at any rate, this little brief teaching that Jigten Sumgön gave says, Om Svasti, at the feet of the sublime Guru I bow. Wholeheartedly engender within one's mind stream love, compassion, and bodhicitta towards sentient beings limitless as space. And with this bodhicitta that has now arisen, allow physical, verbal, and mental actions to become inseparable with it. Amazing and wondrous is this Dharma, in which one works towards complete awakening, so that sentient beings of all worlds, without exception, may be happy and free from suffering. This is known as great vastness. Suchness itself, primordially birthless, one's own Vajra mind, unconditioned, is beyond the realm of speech, thought, concept, and expression. Conceptual minds cannot fathom it. This is thus known as deep profundity. So he's giving us vastness and profundity. It is my request that you put into practice this oral instruction on profundity and vastness. As for the method on how to do this, just ask this profound and vast Dharma itself. For any method that accords with this Dharma is just right, no matter how it is done. So you see the tremendous freedom. I mean, in all of our worlds, you know, people desperately, it's such a natural thing to want freedom. And yet we don't know how to go about it. And we conceptualize freedom in such limited ways that, you know, ends up with all sorts of exclusions, inclusions, blunders, all sorts of things, this tragic scene that we see. But with this vastness and the profundity, there has to be both. It's like Garam Pache says, we fly to enlightenment on two wings. You know, one is the vastness and one is profundity. He said compassion and wisdom, but that's what Jigten Sumgön is translated as here. But with that, like he said, if you generate this bodhicitta, and then your body, speech, and mind, your actions, your words, and your thoughts become infused with it and manifest it, are practicing it, even if it's halting, whatever. But suddenly there's the great freedom because we're doing one thing. Life becomes very simple, although vast. It's not one thing like a little dot, but it's more like, what's that verse from the English poet William Blake, you know, to see, I think, what infinity in a grain of sand, something like that. Everything becomes vast, and yet the particularity is there at the same time, which is wisdom. So the little bit when you do some extra reading or something, and you start to, I've had some advantages because of my daughters, especially Megan with her Indian studies are pretty vast. And she's had excellent, you know, scholarly teachers on that too. But it gives you kind of a sense of where the Tibetan Buddhism came from, you know, the Indian cultural kind of crucible or context. I don't know quite what to say. The richness of it, but also the profundity. And with that, it's very kind of inspiring. You know, it gives you confidence. You get the sense of civilizations, not just individual beliefs, which is so often the way that we approach, you know, religious subjects. And really, the Dharma is both religious and non-religious. You know, the middle way between the extremes of materialism and the extremes of a kind of very strong kind of eternalism. This middle path. Nothing really like it. But I thought I might just read this this introduction to one chapter in this book. This book is Rediscovering the Buddha, Legends of the Buddha and Their Interpretations by Hans Penner. Hans Penner was professor, passed away a couple of years ago at Dartmouth College. in New Hampshire, and I happened to take two courses from him while I was there, and I was kind of looking for pass-fail courses that would allow me to do nothing and yet and get some no grade. They give you a grade secretly, but it wasn't on your transcript, so it couldn't hurt you, so to speak, in any kind of class standing or anything. And I was just looking for a lazy way to do something. And isn't that how it goes? When you do something just kind of naturally, it turned out to be a very significant course for me, although unrealized for 4 years. At any rate, he's written this wonderful book, Rediscovering the Buddha, and he builds up the context, including Gautama's previous life, which was the perfection of giving, as Vesantara. There's this whole wonderful legend about Vesantara coming as the perfection of giving, which resulted in the next lifetime of Gautama, who then became Shakyamuni. But just to start with the cosmology, because we sense this when we are doing the four immeasurables, the prayers that we do, talking about love, compassion, um, um, and then spontaneous joy for virtues and others, and then finally the great equanimity. These are reflected in the cosmology of ancient India. And so he's saying a little bit about that. So I'll read just a little bit of this, and that'll probably do it for us tonight. Why is there something rather than nothing? Because nothing at all is impossible. There is no beginning, there is no end. The universe is a pulsating evolution and devolution, an everlasting expansion and contraction in which countless galactic systems are created and destroyed throughout vast cosmic eons, in which countless Buddhas have appeared and will appear in the future. Some say that in eons, an eon is, and then he has a 10 surrounded by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, by 27 zeros, 10 followed by 27 zeros. Some say that an eon is that, years long. Others say, although it is not infinite, it is not calculable. Once at Savatthi in the Jeta Grove, a monk asked the Buddha, how long, Lord, is an eon? The Buddha told him, it is not possible to count how long using years, centuries, or even many thousands of centuries. The monk then asked whether a parable could be used to illustrate, and the Buddha said, suppose there was a great rock mountain about 5 miles wide, 5 miles long, and 5 miles high, without any cracks, but one solid mass. Suppose also at the end of every 100 years, a man were to stroke it just once with an expensive piece of cloth from Varanasi. Well, that mountain in this way would sooner be done away with and ended than would an eon. So long, monk, is an eon. It is incalculable. The architecture of cosmic space in this pulsating universe consists of 3 spheres. The highest sphere is without form or sensation. This is called rupa. That means without form, but it also means without sensual or desire-like sensation. The highest sphere is without form or sensation. The middle sphere is form only, without sensation. The lowest sphere consists of both form and sensation. It includes our world. And this is the 3 realms that we hear about. The realm of desire, in which human beings, animals, sensual gods, hungry ghosts, jealous gods, hellish beings. That's the realm of desire, all motivated by either wanting something or wanting to run away from something. And the realm above that is called the Rupakaya, the realm of form, but it means subtle form. These are the higher God realms. And then above that, the Arupa, the Brahmaloka, the four realms of infinity. I can't remember what they correspond to, but subtler and subtler. The highest that you can go in worldly experience. The lowest sphere, the realm of desire, consists of both form and sensation and includes our world, with Mount Meru as its axis, and many hells below, and 6 heavens above, with Tushita as the fourth. The Buddha was born from Tushita. Our world is ruled by Sakya, Indra, king of all deities, who rules from his abode in the second heaven, Davatimsha, at the summit of Mount Meru. Sakya presides over the first heaven just below the summit that contains the palaces of the 4 guardians of the 4 classes of beings in the world. In the north is the palace of Kuvera, who rules over human beings. Viruha rules the south, the dominion of the ancestors. In the east, Dattatrata rules the gods, and Virupaka rules the antigods from his palace in the west. These figures are all there in our visualization. And they're also, so when you do, yourself as the Buddha and you'll talk about the 4 guardians, like in Vajrakalaya, that's who these figures are. So it's absorbing this cosmology map of ancient India. And it's not necessarily to have to believe in that in a scientific way, but in a spiritual way, because they all represent so many different states of mind, but more. I mean, I had an interesting conversation once with a Tibetan to understand, this is hard for us to understand how real these things are to like a traditional Tibetan. And one was telling me about, he was trying to buy a house and he didn't have enough money. And then in the midst of this, one of these 4 guardians like just appeared to him, and he kind of manifested it to me as he was talking to me. It was completely convincing, I must say. Not like an actor and an actress, but just this immediate, just kind of ripple went through him. And you felt, these guardians are not enlightened beings, but have power. And then out of this brief experience that he had, suddenly he found a way to finance it in this very creative kind of way. And, someone without not much ended up with a house for his family. What struck me was this complete interdependence, this interpenetration rather, of this traditional kind of belief and practicality. I mean, this wasn't like me in Hans Penner's class, reading about some figure or the 4 guardian figures. So you go to any temple in Tibet and you see these 4 guardian figures. One of them is the one that we see with the holding the mongoose and spitting out jewels, the god of wealth. So all of these things, are just in their mind. Nonetheless, after many eons, this world contracts, and most of the various beings are reborn in the middle sphere of form only. So this again is the realm of the higher gods. Mind born, they dwell there, feeding on delight. They are self-luminous, traversing the air, dwelling there for many eons. But the world begins to evolve once again. At that time, there was only water. All was darkness. No sun or moon nor stars appear. There is neither day nor night, no months, fortnights, years, or seasons. And at that time, there is neither male nor female. Beings are simply identified as beings. After a long period, savory earth began to spread over the waters. It looked just like the skin that forms on hot milk as it cools. It was the color of fine, clarified butter, very sweet, like wild honey. Conditioned by previous births, some greedy being said, "What is this?" and tasted some of the savory earth. It desired more, and craving arose in it. Other beings also tasted the savory stuff, and as a result, their self-luminance faded away. As this happened, the moon, sun, and stars appeared, together with the year and its seasons. The world began to evolve and expand once again. The beings continued to feast and be nourished on the savory earth for a very long time. In the course of time, their bodies became more solid, and differences in their appearance became apparent. Some became good-looking, others became ugly. The good-looking ones began to despise the others, saying, "We are better looking and better off than they are." Because of their arrogance and conceit, the savory earth disappeared. When the savory earth disappeared, something like mushrooms appeared, which also had the color of clarified butter and was as sweet as wild honey. The beings feasted on these outgrowths for a very long time, finding them to be good food and nourishment. As they continued to feast, their bodies became even more solid and coarse. The differences in their looks increased, as did arrogance and conceit. As a result, the sweet outgrowths disappeared. Then creepers appeared, growing like bamboo with a savory flavor, and the beings feasted and were nourished by the creepers for a very long time. As they feasted, their bodies became even more solid, and the differences in their appearances increased, as did conceit and arrogance. As a result, the creepers also disappeared. When the creepers vanished, rice appeared in open spaces outside the jungle. It was free from mildew, had no husk, and was pure, fragrant, and clean grained. What rice the beings took in the evening for supper stood ripe the next morning for breakfast. And what they had taken for breakfast was again ripe and ready without reaping for eating at dinner. They did so for a long time, and as a result grew more solid still. The differences in their looks even more pronounced. Females and males developed sexual organs and became preoccupied with each other. Passions were aroused, and lust entered their bodies, resulting in sexual activity. One day, the following thought occurred to a being with a lazy disposition. Well, now, why should I be bothered to get rice in the evening for dinner and in the morning for breakfast? Why don't I just gather it all at once for both meals? And he did so. And another being came to him and said, "Let's go get some rice." "Never mind," said the lazy one. "I've gathered enough for both meals." Following his example, the other fellow gathered rice for 2 days at a time, saying that should be enough. It did not take long before others gathered rice for 4 days, and then 8 days. These beings then began feasting and living on hoarded rice. The rice mildewed, and husks began to envelop the grain. It had to be reaped. And where it was reaped, it did not grow again. Only clumps of stubble remained. This degeneration from the mind-made, self-luminous life of delight led those beings to come together and lament the increasingly wicked ways that had become rife among them. Some of them said, "Let us divide up the rice into fields with boundaries." And so they did. But then one day, a greedy-natured being, while guarding his own plot, took another plot that was not his and feasted on its produce. The others seized him and rebuked him for stealing, telling him never to do such an evil thing again. "I won't," he replied, but he did it again, a second and a third time. Again, he was seized, admonished, and punished by being hit with a fist, stones, and sticks. This was the origin of theft, censure, lying, and punishment. And it goes on and on and on. But there's something to me very powerful about this sense of this self-luminant state of awareness, the sense that we've fallen from something instead of the natural arrogance we have as human beings, that this is the whole show. And instead, there's this humility when you come across big teachings like this. When you meet someone who doesn't take that as a fairy tale in the sense of being completely false, but rather takes it as an approximation of the manifestation of the nature of our mind, it just changes things. You sense the depth of the teacher, you sense the vastness of the teachings, and that is how we see it in ourselves. This strange kind of function where deep down we have such a limited, alienated view of ourselves that it's easier to see the Buddha in someone else, although that's rare, than it is to see it in ourselves. But this faith that we do have Buddha nature, this is what allows us to see it in a lama or a guru. And it's like the simplest path of it all. So at any rate, that's my little ruminations on this evening. I feel like we're kind of back in the saddle after these kind of weeks of disruption here, getting ready disruption for the Chod retreat. I think Kempo is back from Wisconsin, where he was hanging out with Kenshin Koncho Gyaltsen, one of the most senior Kempos in the Drikung, which is actually the one that the Tibetan Meditation Center, the original Drikung institution in America, he was there for many, many years. He was like the teacher there. Okay, so any thoughts from anybody? Otherwise, we'll do the dedication and call it a night.
Frank, I was thinking of something when you were teaching before. We all know that there was a lot of catastrophe and misery that happened to the Tibetans from the Chinese, right?
Yeah.
And then these lamas and rinpoches and emphasized compassion and peace and compassion, and then they started stressing, sending compassion to your enemies, and then they were sending compassion to their enemies, and then the Dalai Lama mentioned this a couple of times, that now China is 33% Buddhist. Right? After 50 years of these incredible Rinpoches sending them compassion, right? Instead of wishing them harm, wishing them well.
Right.
And that's like the result, that the country will be transformed from compassion.
It's, we all have such short vision, we don't see things long term. And what's remarkable to me, that I really truly believe there's enough sort of, because of the power of this tradition, there's enough people in Tibet who really have that sense that, yes, you can do hatred based on some immediate wrong that's happening to you, but there's more to it than that we don't see. Someone said once that, the Marxists, especially the Maoist types, they thought they would just smash Tibet. And that would just get rid of all the feudalism, all the superstition, all the negative things that they saw. That's all they saw when they looked at Tibet. I think there were 6 foreigners in Tibet when the Chinese invaded. They had this mythology, this propaganda that the evil capitalists had taken over Tibet or something, but it was all just fantasy. But nonetheless, so they were going to smash Tibet because that was the idea. You destroy the old, and the wonderful nature of people would just create something wonderful. Someone said, though, that Tibet was like a ball of mercury, and they hit it with a hammer, but little balls of mercury went all over the world. There wouldn't be any Tibetan lamas in the West, and now they're all over the place. And yet you never hear them. It's so remarkable. There's no whining. There's no one saying the terrible things that happen to them. I mean, they'll talk about it, of course. It's not some sort of suppression or denial, but they're not leading with that, for sure. In fact, they have compassion. Dalai Lama said, people would get away from Tibet, especially monks and that, and they have an interview with the Dalai Lama, and especially in the old days. And he talked about one Geshe who, talking to the Dalai Lama, broke down in tears. He was talking about being tortured. And he said, I almost gave up my vow. It's really something. We, in the old days, I knew a woman who was a sort of extended member of the Dharma Center. She lives in Manhattan, and she's a Japanese translator. And she was asked by uh, a Japanese Buddhist master. I can't remember the tradition he's in. It's one I hadn't heard of. It's like Theravada in Japan, but going way back. Um, at any rate, this Japanese teacher had a student who was a Japanese industrialist, fabulously wealthy. This is like in the 1970s. And the industrialists gave, I don't know, $1 million or something, some tremendous donation to a Chinese um, university to have a department of Buddhist studies. And so the Chinese government, the Department of Religion, had a banquet to accept the offering and honor him. And so the Japanese industrialists came to Japan with his teacher, the Japanese Buddhist master, and my acquaintance went there as the interpreter. And if you've ever been to these things that the Chinese do, we touched on this a little bit when we were in China. They pass around this fire water that they have, and it's kind of like even businessmen do this, and everybody gets a little bit loose. And after they were a little bit into their cups, the Chinese minister of religion took this with the translator, took this Japanese, had a Chinese translator too, took this Japanese Buddhist master aside. And, he's a little loose. And he said, we don't know what to do with Tibet. We thought we're just bringing in, roads and hospitals and radio stations and TVs and all these things. But they won't give up. They won't give up. I don't know what to do. This is the minister for religion. And the Japanese master stepped back from him, and it did a prostration. So it's something that is not our normal kind of, like legal negotiation, the art of the deal. Ask for more than you want, exploit their weakness. It's something that we just, to see your enemies as having been your mother and giving you your existence, it's transcendent. So that's wonderful, Roberta. Yes, I know. And now, with their success, many Chinese are experiencing the same kind of spiritual hunger that we have here, where you can have all the money in the world and all the opportunity and everything's worked out well for you, right, in your society. And yet there's still this lack, this kind of hollowness at the core. And what's so remarkable to me is that the Buddha, penetrated that, and it's not a void. Rather, it's full of richness and power and wisdom and everything that we're all truly looking for. I know we're very fortunate, to be sure. Okay. All right. So let's do a dedication. We offer the merit from this evening, the sharing, the thinking, the talking, the experiencing, and even the feeling to all motherly sentient beings. May we have infinite gratitude for the opportunity that we have had lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, coming to this point when we realize that the love of those sentient beings is our path, and may every last one be free, completely resting in their own Buddhahood. Svaha. Okay. All right. Kind of feel like back in the saddle a little bit. So see you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Welcome home.
Thank you.
Welcome back.
Thank you.